This is our research proposal.
By Jocelyn Trudell,
Melody Yu,
Charlie Nadi Makudio,
Mila Motuk,
and Alyssa Domingo.
The University of Calgary, located in the heart of southern Alberta, both acknowledges and pays tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nations, and the Stoney Nakoda, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. Introduction. In 2016, women are more likely than men to choose a bachelor's degree or above as the highest level of education desired. There is a problem though, because although women are more likely to desire higher education, the same study says that more women than men report that they encounter obstacles preventing them from achieving the highest level of education desired. Although this statistic was gathered in 2016, this sociological trend is still relevant today. For men and women to have equity, this topic needs to be investigated. We wanted to question why this is. How does intersectionality impact women in finishing a bachelor's degree? Our research study looks into intersectionality factors, specifically sex, economic status, and race, and how they may play a role or factor in women and their education. It focuses specifically on different women's backgrounds and how that impacts them towards finishing their degrees. This group is very passionate about this topic, as we are all women on the path of obtaining our very own degrees. Although this may create research bias, our research is designed to be as unbiased as possible through probability sampling. Through background investigation of the topic, a mixed methods approach for collecting data, and analysis of our variables and sample size, this presentation breaks down how we will research how intersectionality impacts a woman finishing their bachelor's degree.
Okay, so to provide context for our study, we'll look at the 5 articles that describe women's intersections and its implications in their educational advancement. The first research is conducted by Raffaele, Al-Nabilsi, and Sold in 2022, where they examine how ethnic minority women, specifically women in Arab Bedouin, face structural barriers and gender inequalities which hinders their progress at post-secondary education. Raffaele et al. 2022 collected data through a qualitative approach by implementing focus groups based on semi-structured interviews. Through their study, they found that there is a strong correlation between family gender barriers and institutional discrimination towards young Bedouins' challenges with post-secondary attainment. The next study is conducted by Taz et al. 2014, and they examine how gender and ethnicity impacts educational outcomes. To gather their data, they applied a quantitative approach where they used census data of select Latin American and African countries, specifically Bolivia, Mexico, Peru, Senegal, and Sierra Leone. Taz et al. 2014 found that there is a significant gender gap in educational outcomes, and this gap is only intensified when ethnicity is at play alongside gender. The third research is done by Guerrero and Rojas in 2020, where they evaluate how gender and ethnicity plays a role in attaining higher education. By adopting a qualitative approach, they were able to collect information using in-depth interviews, ethnographic observation, and participatory methods based on young women in Peru. Their research explained how gendered norms and roles affect young women's educational advancements in Peru, and how this is amplified for women of low socioeconomic status. So the fourth study is done by Kalu SR in 2022, and they explore how the racial opportunity gap impacts post-secondary completion. To collect their data, they used a qualitative approach where they used a longitudinal design by a sample of Black high school girls. Kalu SR 2022 found that teacher bias, school discipline, and school resources all had a significant impact towards college expectations for the Black high school girls that were used in the study sample. So the last research is conducted by Regal Cram, Menglu Pang, and Russo Tate 2019, where they evaluate how the intersection of race and gender impacts Asian and white females in completing STEM post-secondary education. By applying a mixed methods approach, they were able to collect data using surveys, cohorts, and informal interviews. Their research found that the low rates of women in STEM is a result of gender inequalities, and their findings gave a better understanding of how social systems of the intersectionality of race and gender influence women's experiences in completing a STEM post-secondary degree. Now that we have looked at the findings from these 5 studies, we can conclude that the implication of women's intersections, such as race, sex, or economic status, for example, does pose a significant challenge in women's advancement in higher education. Our study would be useful, however, as we would examine how intersectionality affects women studying at our university, the University of Calgary.
This will be a mixed methods study done cross-sectionally. We will use both quantitative surveys as well as qualitative interviews with participants. Using both quantitative and qualitative methods will be advantageous for our study because with the quantitative surveys, we can give us ground to compare our qualitative interview findings in our later analysis. All data that we use will be collected during the research. To start our research, a quantitative survey will be sent out to U of C alumni so we can get the focus group from the response to then interview them more in-depthly. The survey will open for a month after being sent out to those individuals. We will start the survey with the general questions about the participant to understand what socioeconomic that they are a part of. And then from the gathered surveys, we will use systematic sampling to pick participants. One of the first questions we will ask in the survey is what is their UCID to keep their identities anonymous. From there, such questions will be asked as what is your degree or program name. We will ask them their biological sex as this pertains to the main area of study. Then we will ask their age, marital status, if they have any children, if there's any codependent. We will also ask which tax bracket they fall under.
Qualitative approach. The proposed study will take on a qualitative approach to go beyond statistics and learn more about the challenges and barriers students face in achieving a bachelor's degree. The qualitative method is applied to conduct semi-structured interviews. The following questions will be asked. What's your full name? Do you rely on government aid to sustain your education? In what ways has your educational experience been influenced by your background or your gender? And if you plan to take a break from post-secondary education, what contributed to this decision? The research design will be also a cross-sectional design. This focuses on taking observations at one point in time. The strengths for cross-sectional studies are that we can examine the effects of variables that cannot be manipulated. Specifically for this study, are variables of students' race, gender, and socioeconomic status. We are also measuring 2 or more variables to detect patterns of association. However, it is important to note that correlation does not equal causation. The weaknesses of cross-sectional approach. The external validity may be weak. However, to ensure that it can be generalizable to future studies, we have decided to randomize the selection of participants by using probability systematic sampling. Lastly, we are generating data to gather personal and relevant issues from this point in time, focusing on preserving naturalistic environments and observing how these variables affect the student's educational journey.
Quantitative research has reliability because there is internal consistency. Quantitative surveys can be applied at the same scenarios in the future, and the results will be similar because of the close-ended questions given that provide the participants with a set of answers. Qualitative research is less reliable as the answers can be various and there is no guarantee of inter-observational consistency with open-ended questions. For this study, it is hard to define whether this can be considered reliable in regards to stability over time, as there are many factors that affect the passage of time in a study if touched by society.
Measurement of validity. There are two types of validity. Internal validity, which focuses on causality or measures the relationship it is intended to assess without spurious relationship or a third variable influencing the relationship. Second is external validity, which refers to the extent to which the results of a study can be generalizable or applied to other situations beyond the specific conditions of the study. In quantitative research, the main focus of quantitative research is to strive for high internal and external validity. So, internal validity is high because researchers want to establish causality. And secondly, external validity is also high because researchers want to apply findings to large numbers of people. In qualitative research, instead of looking at high or low internal validity, qualitative research looks at credibility, transferability, dependability, confirmability, or overall trustworthiness of the study. First of all, there's credibility, which is the practice of getting feedback from respondent validation. Second is transferability, which uses thick descriptions or rich and detailed accounts of personal perspectives. Third is dependability, which uses auditing to keep complete records of all phases of the research process, such as problem formulation, selection of research participants, fieldwork notes, interview transcripts, and etc. And last is confirmability, which holds the researcher accountable and ensures that they have acted in good faith. Lastly, external validity is measured by transferability of findings to be generalizable so that the potential to be used as precedent to similar context is available.
Variables and sample size. The sample that we are studying for our research are specifically University of Calgary undergraduate students and alumni who have only finished their bachelor's degree. And the variables associated in our research are the different intersectionalities related to female post-secondary students' experiences. The specific variables we are focusing on are biological sex, economic status, and race. In our study, the independent variables are biological sex, economic status, and race, and the dependent variables is the ability of female students finishing post-secondary degrees. In other words, how does biological sex, economic status, and race impact female students in their journey to finishing a post-secondary degree? So, in our research specifically, we are looking at race, biological sex, and socioeconomic status. Before we go on, we will define these terms for our study. Race divides any one of the groups that humans are often divided into based on their physical traits regarded as common among people of shared ancestry. And when we are talking about biological sex in our study, we are referring to either of the two major forms of individuals that occur in many species and are distinguished respectively as female or male on the basis of the reproductive organs and structures. Lastly, the socioeconomic status of a person is the position of an individual or group in the socioeconomic scale, which is determined by a combination of social and economic factors. Next, we will be operationalizing our variables. In our study, in order to operationalize and measure our variables, we will be conducting semi-structured interviews and sending over surveys for our participants to respond to. When we are conducting these semi-structured interviews, we will be asking questions to our participants regarding how their race, sex, and socioeconomic status has impacted their post-secondary career so far. The types of questions we will most likely be asking are if they have experienced any difficulty at school in obtaining opportunities, making connections, etc., because of their intersectionality. We will also ask them how confident they are in regards to completing their degree because of these factors. Next, we will send out surveys by email to students where they will have to answer questions regarding how specific factors such as their race, sex, economic status, etc. have impacted their experience in post-secondary education so far. The responses collected from the survey will be our data. In order to find our participants for a suitable population, we will be sending around 200 surveys. From these 200 surveys, we are hoping to receive at least 50% return in response, in which we will then randomly select 20 respondents for semi-structured interviews. In order to do this, we would need to gain approval from the university to obtain current and former student UCID and emails. Once the approval is granted, we will be able to send out our surveys. Since every researcher has their own bias going into any research, we will pick out 20 participants randomly through their UCID only in order to try our best to reduce bias. This will ensure the selection process is random and not based on any qualities of the actual people. Finally, after we pick out our participants, we will then conduct interviews regarding their experiences in post-secondary education based on our 3 variables such as race, sex, and the socioeconomic status of our participants.
Research ethics. To ensure our research is conducted ethically, we will have to seek permission from the president of the school for consent to access the emails of the alumni. After consent is granted, we will be able to send out the survey to the alumni via email. To ensure complete confidentiality, the survey responses will all be anonymous. Thus, only the respondents who want a chance to be selected for the semi-structured interviews will have the option to put their student identification number, UCID. The research will also be conducted overtly and will disclose the purpose of the research to all participants so that they are aware of what they are participating in. Throughout the entire research process, we will apply informed and continuous consent for all of our participants. This is because if the potential harm and risks of individuals participating in our research are greater than the risks of everyday life, informed consent is a minimum requirement. Our proposed study requires approval from the Research Ethics Board, REB, which we then also recognize the general ethical principles of TSPS2. Number 1, respect for persons. Number 2, concern for welfare. And number 3, justice.
Here are our references. Thank you for your time.